My bank manager, my financial advisor, I mean, they basically they said, you're crazy, Andre. You just can't do that right now. I mean, you haven't got the resources to do it. You haven't got anything else. Well, in the first year, just doing that doubled our business.
Follow the compass home. Let the truth lead the way. You don't have to rush your knowing. It's been with you every day. Share a little bit about him. He's a social psychologist, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and just passionate about creative thinking and that. So we're going to dive right in here and see how Andre has either listened to or ignored his inner compass. So Andre, share a little bit more about what you're doing and how the inner compass affected you.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for having me on your show, Bruce. I think one of the things about the inner compass that had a major impact on my life was in my early days as an entrepreneur. In my 20s, I started to invent things, and I took two of my crazier inventions to patented them, and they became global leaders in their field. One of them was a piano microphone that, in the last few years of his professional life, Frank Sinatra wouldn't get on stage without using it.
Wow.
And Elton John and BBC, and I mean, as a laundry list of users. And the other set of inventions was accepted as a worldwide standard for making our medical ultrasound imaging systems that much safer. So these, during the course of building this business into an international organization, I had a lot of pushback from the experts that I either followed or ignored, depending on my mood. And I remember when moving from the UK to the US to start my US subsidiary company here. My bank manager, my financial advisor, I mean, they basically they said, you're crazy, Andre. You just can't do that right now. I mean, you haven't got the resources to do it. You haven't got anything else. Well, in the first year, just doing that doubled our business, and it was the path to the business becoming a sizable organization. And one of the things I think that taught me was the power of what I previously thought of as intuition.
Mhm.
In other words, on the one hand, you've got this. I mean, sort of some of my coaching clients. One in particular. So shall I leave my boyfriend? I've got. On the one hand, he's this, that, and the other. On the other hand, he drives me crazy, and da, da, da. You've got this kind of. And what a ridiculous thing to do, to apply logic to something which is purely emotional. I mean, it just makes no sense at all. But it's the sort of thing that we've been trained to do.
Yep.
So the notion that we've got, this very logical deductive process, which I believe in today's very techie, logic driven analytical world, we're drilling down, we're focusing in. This is all very convergent thinking. And on the other hand, we have things that I once thought of as intuition, and I now believe is much more related to creativity.
Mhm.
It's a very different way of thinking. And when I started to develop these ideas in my first book, which was 2011, that was published, it was really kind of theories that were built out of observation and discussion and so forth, experience. And in the course of the next decade, when we had functional MRI imaging coming around, and we could actually see what's going on in people's brains as they think different things, that became an incredibly powerful driver for me because it validated a lot of these, previously rather speculative ideas. And so you could see that when you ask people to do something analytical and so forth, there is one set of neural pathways lighting up. And when you ask them to do something to do with creativity, then a totally different set of neural pathways will illuminate. And interestingly, the creativity ones are pretty much the same as the ones we use with emotional intelligence. And so, my personal belief is that if you're going to put trust in your personal compass, then you have to realize that your personal compass is actually a balance between the creative thinking process and this analytical deductive process. And if you look at artists, I've always had the fortune or misfortune, depending which way you look at it, to be surrounded by creative people. My mother and my father were very creative people. And when I was 7, my mother was institutionalized. And so I saw the darker side of creativity. But basically, creative people, if they're going to be successful creative people, they need a balance. It's not as if they're abandoning deductive analytical thinking. You know, when my 91-year-old half sister goes off, packs the car with paints and canvases and God knows what all else, and disappears up in the hills to paint for a few weeks, you know, she has to have deductive analytical processes going on. I need this, I'm going to need that. She's got to have, you know, all this is the logical side of it. But without that, she can't paint. She'll get there and she's got the wrong stuff or not enough of the right stuff or whatever. So we have to have that balance.
Yeah.
And you know, you'll see behind me banish burnout, and I believe that without that balance, and specifically if you're really focused on this analytical deductive process, you are really depriving yourself of resilience
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you know that as we talked about before, that analytical process is incredibly convergent thinking. And if you're coaching people with burnout or anxiety, you see this in practice. They are trapped. They cannot think outside of the hamster wheel. They're like a racehorse with blinders on. Their vision of the world is very narrowed and focused in. And creativity is quite the opposite of that. Creativity is a totally divergent way. In fact, as social scientists like myself, if we're researching creativity, it's very difficult to do directly because it's such an objective phenomenon. But if we use divergent thinking tests, we have found that they're very, very close to measuring creativity. So this divergence allows you to see the future, allows you to see options. And it's not surprising that once again, the neural paths, it is actually related to happiness. They
Yeah,
found that people,
absolutely. Yeah, this isn't
and it's an important
it's
thing, isn't
behind
it?
me the logical intuitive. That's me and stuff. So my background was 37 years as a computer programmer, web developer. So that really honed my logical brain, and then had health challenges and that. So my personal health journey, variety of different situations that really heightened my intuition. So it's just that combination, getting that balance and everything. It's just what you're talking to and stuff. You need both, and that it's just like for me when I was working on a program. This is that logic. Okay, what do I need to what's the end goal for this program or this project? And then getting the creative brain kicking in. Says, okay, how can I make it happen here? And that so that is fantastic. So, I mean, was you mentioned about burnout and that? So did you have a moment where you realized, that burnout wasn't just stress, but it was signaling you to, you know, that you were ignoring something deeper, and to pay closer attention to your intuition?
Very much so, yes. In the last couple of years of my entrepreneurial career, before I sold my businesses, I had very severe burnout. A number of things came together, as things can sometimes tend to do, and that it was as if the one side of this razor blade is excitement and high energy, and just over the other side there is anxiety and this whole very kind of introspective process which has such negative consequences. And I realized that during that time, the burnout, was, and I'm going back now to the very early 1990s. So this is a long, long time ago. But I had never imagined that something related to kind of work stress and things of that nature can be quite so devastating. And it was a very it stayed with me, that process. I was very lucky actually because I pushed everybody away. My wife had gone back to stay with her mother for a while, who was not doing too well. And I'd pushed my friends away, and one friend wouldn't resist. I mean, he just wouldn't accept that. So I'd say, Jim, I can't do it this week. I'm just too busy. Let's meet up next week. And the following morning, there's a knock on the door, and there's Jim there with a brown bag full of really healthy components for breakfast, and he wouldn't give up. He just ignored, my pushing. And on day three, he said, "Look, this piece of paper has got a telephone number on it, and I want you to call her." And it was a lady called Dana Birdsell, and she's a meditation teacher. And she taught me to meditate. And it's a 3-day process. And after day one, it was the first time I'd slept. I had a decent night's sleep for probably close to a year.
Wow.
And it was just amazing. And that stuck with me. And I think that also has a place in this process of balancing one's thinking. So, these things all kind of came together to develop coaching programs that very quickly help people recover from burnout. But it's all about balance. And I think, I love the name of your podcast, and I think this idea of developing a personal compass is a very powerful one. But I think it's, that to get the needle in a direction which is really appropriate for you does require, exactly as your poster suggests, this balance between the logical processes and the intuitive or creative processes. And it's a very interesting process. And the more we learn about, the way the brain works and so forth, the more we tend to find that this process is so important.
Yeah. So do you have one particular tip for identifying burnout before it gets too late, that type of thing? Is it
Well, no, absolutely. And it's actually identifying it as burnout rather than, just a stress or overwork. Is a process that has a number of components. So, if anybody wants to examine, this a little bit further, if they want to start to delve into ways that they can help build resilience and burnout, then going to my website, clicking on the button and picking a 30-minute free coaching session with me will, I think, help them understand what they're going through and put it into some context.
Okay, well, yeah, we'll link your website and everything on my podcast website. So everybody, just the innercompasspodcast.com, and says everything will be linked there. And so just before we close here, it says I always like to ask my guests a few inner compass questions. And so when you notice your inner compass speaking to you and that intuition is coming up, what does it usually feel like or sound like to you? This is, how do you know that your intuition is speaking to you?
Um, for me, it's a matter of um,
Is it like a little whisper or something, or how do you?
yeah. I think it pops up if I'm sort of trying to make a decision, and it feels as if I've got two different people trying to make the decision in my head. And that's when I realized that there is a discontinuity then between these two ways of looking at the options that we have. And it's pretty easy to spot because, most of the time you're making a decision and it's like, yes, this feels right. Bam, there we go. And then sometimes it isn't. Sometimes you don't get that sort of this feels right feeling. You just get the different sets of ideas and it just doesn't sort of settle. And so that's when one has to step back and really make sure that the creative brain is put in place alongside the logical one.
That's great. Yeah. So the second question kind of leads into that. It says, how do you personally distinguish between fear, logic, and your true inner guidance? How do you make that distinction between them
Between fear and logic
and intuition?
and intuition. Um, I'm not sure that I go out of my way to try and identify those areas. I think one thing that is an identifier is quite often the very first thing that comes into your mind is fear. Because that's really going right back to the lizard brain, the
Yeah.
amygdala, and so that's going to be your first intuitive reaction. And so, my first job, if I'm looking at that kind of decision, is to say, okay, that's noted. Now be quiet. You can shut up, and we'll have a look at the rest of what's going on in the prefrontal cortex and have a look at this in a more sensible way. So that'll dismiss fear. And then the task is a little simpler because we're looking at, okay, how do I look at this to see all my options? Just doing a piece of personal brainstorming where you literally, you don't necessarily have to get your pad of post-it notes and stick them all over the wall, but you can if you like, but literally putting down every idea, however crazy, and then allow the logical brain to come in and say, you know what, we just can't, we don't have the funds for that, we don't have the time for that. That leaves this little bunch, and then you've got this balance. You've allowed both halves
Yeah,
to
it's
give
just
you some
kind of
input.
keeping that open mind and listening to everything that your brain is trying to tell you, and then weighing that and listening to each of those voices. And this is and just yeah, I love that. This is, just having to keep your mind open to all the different options and opportunities, and that's is absolutely that's yeah. So my final question really is, I'd like to ask if there is a question regarding the inner compass that you would like to have a future guest answer regarding inner compass. What would you like a future guest to answer? What kind of question do you have?
I think I'd like them to answer the question, if you are trying to make a decision with your inner compass, um, to what extent do you think about the future and how you are going to feel about the option that you select, when you look back on it?
Excellent question. Yes, yes. So, um, yeah, just appreciate all of your sharing here. It's just falls right in line with my thinking and the podcast theme here. And again, everybody, this is if you want to take advantage of Andre's offer to connect with him, this is my the innercompasspodcast.com is my website, and all of his information that will be available there. So encourage you to check that out. And again, thank you, Andre, for being here, and much success, and keep listening to your inner compass.
Thank you so much, Bruce. It's been a pleasure.